welcome to another episode of She Talks Business. I'm excited to be here today with one of my favorite people, Allie Marks. And if you have been listening to the show for any length of time, you will have listened in on the season that I did with my niece, Mackenzie, where Mackenzie sat in the host seat and she asked me a bunch of questions. I had so much fun doing that with Mackenzie that I said on social media that I'd love to do more of these kind of ask me anything episodes. And Allie graciously volunteered to sit in the host seat. So I'd like you to give Allie a warm welcome. And I also want to acknowledge that this is Allie's first ever podcast. She's a podcast virgin. So this is going to be fun. Allie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. It's really, really great to have you here. And why don't you just start by telling our guests a little bit about you and why you wanted to do this?
Well, I am a Florida girl. I was born and raised in Kansas, but I've lived in Florida most of my life. I have a background in psychology and do some life coaching with middle school and high school students. And I'm a realtor, business owner with my family, which is great being able to work with them day in and day out. And I have a passion for giving back to people, helping people. And I love to sing, and I have a dog, my little French bulldog, and I love her.
That's awesome. So why did you say yes to doing this?
I said yes to doing this because of you. Because I have so enjoyed getting to learn from you, like building a relationship with you, seeing you pour back into people, and really gaining a lot of value from it. And so I just thought, what a better way to be challenged and to do something different and help add value back to people that already know and love you.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to hand the hosting seat over to you. Let's get started. What do you want to know? How can I
Okay.
help you?
Well, let's start off with talking about you mentioned your niece Mackenzie, and I was listening to that episode recently. I think it was episode 136 about simplifying your social media stuff. And you always talk about how you're a numbers person. And if anyone knows me, they know that I am not a numbers person. Numbers get very lost in my head. And so you talked a little bit about vanity metrics. And for business owners, especially when you're a new business, young entrepreneur, it can be really overwhelming looking at the different social media platforms and really knowing what numbers to look at. What really makes sense to your bottom line and your ROI at the end of the day. I think my biggest question on that is how do you know what to look at? There's so many ways to manipulate numbers to make them look the way that you want them to. So, what's a clear cut way for new business owners to look at things and really understand if they're making an impact in their business in the way that they want?
I think the ultimate number is the outcome or the result that you want from your marketing. So if the ultimate outcome is you want more leads in your business, then when you are talking to new potential customers and you ask them, how did you hear about me? What do they say? Do they say, I follow you on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn? Or do they say, I did a Google search and I found your website? To me, it's the ultimate number that you want to pay attention to is the result that you're trying to get in your business. When it comes to social media, it's really easy to manipulate those numbers. I mean, I posted something last week. It was a picture of me with a stack of books. And I just casually said, what's everybody reading? What was your best book of the year? And of course, I got tons and tons and tons of comments on that. But who cares? I got a bunch of book ideas. It's not going to drive business. So if I were to look at the engagement on that particular post, that is 100% a vanity metric. It's not helping me drive business. So I think we have to be less concerned with the metrics on social media and more concerned with the actual business that we're doing as a result of people finding us on social media. I know for myself, there are people that I have purchased things from, people that I'm interested in doing business with, and I creep their stuff and I don't engage with it. So, does it mean that their content isn't effective? No, it just means that I'm observing. And I think that That's one of the things that shifted a lot in social media over the years. It used to be that we were all in on comments and likes and shares. And now people tend to be a little bit more laid back on, kind of just observing and paying attention to what's going on and not necessarily engaging with the content. So just because you have low engagement doesn't mean it's bad. And I think that's the thing that's important. We talk in the book Measure What Matters. They talk about lead and lag indicators. And so for me, the most important indicator is the outcome. Is my business growing? Plain and simple. Because if my business is growing and every time I ask somebody how they found out about me, they tell me it was through Facebook's, Instagram, or LinkedIn, or your podcast or whatever, then I know what marketing is working. And I think we spend too much time agonizing over, oh my God, nobody liked that post, or oh my God, nobody shared that post, or nobody commented on that post. And I don't think those are the numbers that really matter.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Um, what about for work-life balance? When you're a new young entrepreneur, you're like gung ho, really motivated, trying to get things done, get things off the ground. What would you say to new entrepreneurs that are, in this hustle culture that we have, so that they don't face burnout and that they can practice work-life balance early on so that it becomes a discipline, rather than something that they're doing after the fact?
Ali, that's a really, really great question. And I'm probably not going to answer it the way you would suggest. You have the most energy to do things in your 20s and 30s than you have in your whole life. And I can tell you, as someone who's in my 50s now, I could burn the candle at both ends in my 20s and in my 30s, and even, maybe part of my 40s and not feel burnt out. And so, what I would say to you is when you're young and before you have a family, you need to actually think about this is a time for you to go hard. This is a time for you to really go all in on setting the stage for the future you want. Because once you're married, you now have partner obligations. Once you have kids, you have children obligations. When you have more pets, you have puppy obligations. And so life doesn't get simpler as you age, it tends to get more complex. And so you actually have less time typically as you get older than you have when you are younger. And so I don't think that people should, get 2 hours of sleep per night, but I think that there's a misconception around how hard you can work. I have an autoimmune disease. I have Crohn's disease. And I remember my mom telling me when I was a kid, oh, child, you remember, you're not like other people. You can't just burn the candle at both ends. And I was like, mom, there's two different types of stress. There's the stress that pulls you down, and there's the stress that rises you up. There's stress that is energizing and exciting, and it almost feeds and gives you energy. And then there's the stress that makes you feel depleted. It's the stuff that makes you go, oh, I have to do that. Oh, I don't want to do that. I think what you have to do when you're young is pay attention to how much of what you're doing is energizing you and how much is depleting you, and do more of what energizes you and less of what depletes you. I also think that work-life balance is a myth. It is your life, and you are going to work and you are going to take breaks. It's all the same thing. We're not back in the 60s or the 70s where people work a traditional, 9 to 6 with 1 hour off for lunch, and that's all you do. Like, work isn't like that anymore. You can work at 7 a.m. in the morning, you can work at 10 o'clock at night. Like, especially people that have location and time flexibility, you get to choose to work when you want to work. Might go to the gym at 10 o'clock in the morning, whereas somebody who's got a traditional 9 to 5, they can't do that because their job doesn't allow it. So as an entrepreneur, I think it's more important for you to pay attention to the things that energize you versus the things that drain you, and to do less of the things that drain you and more of the things that energize you while you have the time and energy to do it.
Yeah, I think that that makes sense, especially looking at the dynamic with my family and doing business together and how those different stages of life play into the business together. So I think it's just really interesting to get that feedback on it. We've talked a lot about different generations and how even the changes in the social media with generations and stuff, plays out and looks different, what the differing opinions are on that. Um,
Everybody's different. Everybody's different. And so I think you have to do you. I think as soon as one of the things that I always say is we're entrepreneurs because we don't want to follow the rules. We want freedom. But so many entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs and then they try to put themselves in a box and change why they became an entrepreneur, which was to have freedom. Don't do that to yourself.
I think that's a really great reminder because I think that when you become an entrepreneur, you have seen this nine to six work culture or have experienced it yourself. So it's very easy to fall into those patterns again of
Mhm.
like, oh, I should be doing this, or the majority of people are doing this. So it can be challenging to, look outside the societal box of things
Mhm.
and, reframe what really matters, what's important to you. So I think
Mhm.
that's really great
Yeah.
advice.
And pay attention to the time of day that you are most productive. So I know that I am not productive at night. I'm just not. I'm not a night owl. And so I would rather get up at 5 a.m. and work on a project that I need to get done than start it at 5 p.m. But that's me. I know other people that are the exact opposite. They couldn't drag their butt out of bed at 5 a.m. to work on a project if their life depended on it, but they could work from 5 until midnight, no problem. So be you, know what works for you, and be okay with what works for you.
I like that. So kind of talking around the same line of things is business and being able to pivot. So with you being able to identify like what works best for you as an entrepreneur and then noticing the trends in life in business and being able to pivot. What are your thoughts and advice on being able to pivot in your life and business?
Well, pivot is a buzzword, right? It's one of these things that came up in COVID. Everybody needs to pivot. And I think really what we need to think about is we're constantly changing and growing. And as an entrepreneur, the best advice that I can give you is don't feel obligated to hang on to things that are no longer serving you. Because part of the reason that entrepreneurs are good at being entrepreneurs is because they're creative and they have lots of big ideas. And when you handcuff yourself to a certain way of doing things and you don't give yourself the freedom and flexibility to do it differently, then you start to zap away at your energy. And so to me, pivoting or embracing change or experimentation and trying new ways of doing things as an entrepreneur is a constant. You should be doing that all the time. You should be thinking about how can I do this differently? How could I do this better? How could I make this easier? How could I, 10x this? Like, I think that's part of what makes for a good entrepreneur. I know that in my career as an entrepreneur, people have always looked at me like I'm a little bit crazy because I stopped doing things. So, I ran a big event, a money mindset and marketing for 5 years. And we would have like 400 people come to that event. And then I said, okay, I'm done. I ran a group coaching program called Profit Pods for 5 years. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. And people are like, what? You're going to walk away from $250,000 in sales? Yeah, I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. I want to do something different. So give yourself permission to choose to do different things because when you hang on to the things that no longer energize you, that no longer are really making you feel excited about doing them, then you're kind of putting yourself in that box. You're forcing yourself to do things that you don't want to do. And so I think it's important to trust your judgment and lean into your creative insights. And when you're going to make changes, start think through your changes before you make them. Do some proof of concept stuff, do some experiments so that this choice that you're going to make is going to help you land okay. I'm not going to cut out $250,000 in my business without thinking through what is the financial impact of that going to be, or because I have a team. So you have to make decisions that are responsible. And that sometimes means you need a little bit of a runway in terms of the timing of when you make the decisions. So just think through things like that so you don't end up in a financial pickle.
Hmm. So, and you mentioned the creative aspect of being an entrepreneur, which I love because I think a lot of times people think entrepreneur and they think like business person, they think big picture and forget about the creative aspect and the vision that a lot of entrepreneurs have. What I've seen just in my generation and growing up is like people want to fit into a box sometimes, or society teaches you how to fit into these different boxes. And so, for younger people that are growing up and maybe don't have someone in their life, in their sphere of influence, in the intro, in the entrepreneurial mindset, like field realm,
Mhm.
how do they know, like, hey, I can step into this? This is something that I would be good at. Like, I'm a creative person. I can be successful at this.
Well, the truth is, I think the stats say something like 95% of businesses fail within the first 5 years, and the other 90% fail within 5 years after that. So the truth is, running a business and making money from business is hard for most people, or many businesses wouldn't fail. What I would suggest and what I did is start a side hustle. If you really want to be an entrepreneur, then start something on the side during your 9 to 5 and see if you can make money. When I still have my corporate job, I started a organic basket business. And on the side, before the internet was really a popular thing and before social media was even a thing, I was generating $30,000 a year in sales working one weekend a month. And so I knew that if I could generate 30 grand a year working one weekend a month, if I went all in as a business person and I actually committed 40 hours a week to it, I could make money because I had this little proof of concept, this little side hustle that I was able to generate revenue on. And so I think that for people who are a little bit afraid, what you need to do is you need to just experiment with something low risk, try something. You know, one of the things that I always tell my clients is if you can't sell an idea without a sales page, it's probably not worth selling. So if you have an idea for something, talk to people about it. Go reach out to people and say, "Hey, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to do ABC. What is that something that you would be interested in?" And if they say yes, get them to give you money right now. Do some, I call it invitation marketing. You see me do that on social media. Hey, I'm thinking about hosting an event and it's going to be ABC and it's going to be here. We're going to do this, this, and this. If you're interested, send me a message. And the next thing you know, I have 10 people who want to do the thing that I put out there and I don't have a sales page. But what most people do is they do the opposite. I have to get a sales page. It's got to be perfectly branded. I need a copywriter to help me write the copy the perfect way. And then I need a shopping cart and I need an autoresponder and I need all the things. And then they spend money on all the things. And then they put the link out there and they think that people are going to like come out of the woodwork running, and they're not, because they didn't do any proof of concept work before they invested their money. So for me, there are times when I put those things up on Facebook and I say, "Hey, I'm looking for people who want to do ABC," and I get crickets. And I'm so grateful when that happens because I know that that's not an idea worth investing money in because I don't have any buyers. So learn how to experiment and get buyers before you sink money into it.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. And you talk about the finance pieces of a lot of things with the businesses, starting things up. You're a money person. So with the financial management piece of starting a new business and, maybe flushing out some of these ideas ahead of time to make sure that it's a financially sound decision, what processes and steps would you recommend for young entrepreneurs? They don't teach these types of things in school, right? They want to teach you about shapes that you'll use some point in your life, but not the actual constructs of what it looks like to run and operate a business. So what are the key things to work on and look for?
Well, from my perspective, the most important thing that you can generate in a business is profit, because profit is how you pay yourself. profit is how you keep extra money. Profit is how you invest in the business. And the biggest mistake that I see people make is they spend more than they make. And because they spend more than they make, they end up in a deficit. And then that stress that we talked about, it becomes negative stress because now they don't know how to pay their bills. And all of a sudden they feel really, really pressured. They need to sell more stuff because they're trying to just make ends meet. And that's not a fun place to be. So I think one of the smartest things that you can do when you start is figure out, is this business idea financially viable? And what is it going to cost you to do the thing that you're going to do? And how much revenue do you need to generate in order to make enough profit to pay yourself? So I like to play with numbers. Okay. I like to play with numbers just even from a place of curiosity. Like one of the things that I've been asking myself lately is, how do I replace my salary without having to do any work? And so it's just a fun question for me to ask myself, right? I pay myself a pretty decent salary. Um, and I ask myself, like, what would I need to do on a monthly basis through all the other services we offer to increase my fees to a certain amount that that money could pay me to not have to do any work? Like those are the kinds of things that I like to play with. And so I think those are the types of questions you have to ask yourself. So for me, let's just pretend that, and I have to have my trusty little calculator. Let's pretend I pay myself $100,000 a year. Okay. If I pay myself $100,000 a year and I divide that by 12 months, that's $8,333 a month that I would need to generate an additional profit. Because, I mean, in my world, with the work that I do, some of my work is billable. So I'm generating the income that I pay myself because I'm doing things like coaching and running events and advisory work and strategy work and all that. But if I didn't want to do any of it, I just wanted to be the CEO, then in order for me to pay myself 100,000, I would need $8,333 a month. So if I have $8,333 and I have 20 customers a month that work with my team, if I divide that by 20, then I would need an additional $416 per customer per month. So, gee, do you think there's a way for me to adjust my pricing by $100 a week per customer? Probably is. So I like to take numbers and play with them like that and break them down to try to figure out, how can I? And I think when it comes to people starting out their business, there's a few things that happen. First of all, they don't understand pricing for profit. So they look at how much it's going to cost them, and they usually make their cost estimate very conservative instead of aggressive. And so they think, well, I'm going to do this widget, I'm going to sell this thing, and it's only going to cost this much. So therefore I should only, they want to, they price it to make enough money to get by. They don't price it to generate a healthy margin. So years ago, what I used to teach people is, whatever the cost is, triple it for the price. If it's going to cost $100 for you to do the work, charge 300. And then I started reading these books that men wrote. And you know what I found? Freaking guys 5X it. Guys are so aggressive when it comes to pricing, and women need to be too. So if it's going to cost you $100 to do something, charge 500 for it. And then if somebody balks at it and says, "Oh my God, I can't pay 500, then give them a discount to 400. But don't charge $110 for it. It was going to cost you 100, because chances are you were wrong on the estimate of $100. Chances are it's going to cost you 120 or 130. And so if you don't give yourself enough wiggle room there, you're going to lose money.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think especially for women, we tend to, undervalue ourselves sometimes. Or
Mhm.
as a young entrepreneur, even you step into a space where you see all of this stuff, especially on social media, of people who are great, have been experienced for a long time. And so instead of using that as fuel to the fire, it sometimes can come across as like, oh, well, they know more than me and I'm not good enough, instead of using that to really amplify what you know and what you can bring to the table already.
I
I
think you
think
have to
that's
be,
huge.
yeah, and I think you have to be really careful about the assumptions you make about other people's success, because none of us really knows how successful people really are. None of us really knows how much money they take home from their business. I have coached people with mailing lists that are in excess of 10,000, 100,000 people, they can't afford to pay themselves. So just because it looks like you've got a big following on social media doesn't mean you have a healthy business. And so don't compare where you're at against what you perceive someone else to be at. Compare where you're at to where you want to be and make the course corrections to help yourself get there.
For you with entrepreneurship, what really sparked that interest in you when you were younger? What was really the driving force behind you wanting to take this route?
I grew up in a really poor family. When my very first venture really was because I wanted a pair of designer jeans because all the kids at school were wearing designer jeans. And designer jeans at the time, and now keep in mind, I'm in my 50s. So this was 40 years ago. Those jeans were $100. And my mom looked at me and she said, "Child, if you want jeans like that, you're going to have to figure out a way to make money to buy jeans like that because I can't afford jeans like that." My mom was shopping at Zellers. She was shopping at the five and dime. She was buying me $20 jeans, not $100 jeans. And so I figured out how to make enough money to do it. I started taking things to the flea market and selling them. I started making chocolates and selling them. I started making crafts and selling them. And I just knew that if it was to be, it was up to me. If I wanted to have nice things, I needed to figure out a way to do it. And then, I ended up getting into the rat race and I had a job and I had a job for a long time. I had a job, into my mid 30s. And, but my husband and I, when we first moved in together in our mid to late 20s, he was entrepreneurial. He was really, really ballsy. He invested, I think, $30,000 in a board game that kind of went belly up and had to pay that money back and paid that money back. And he was in law enforcement and decided that he wanted to start a business that he could do on his days off because they really only work half the time. So we started a lawn aeration company. We bought a lawn aerator for $2,500 and we hoped that by the end of the summer we could pay it off. Well, we had more than paid it off by the end of the first month. And so that grew into a full-fledged lawn care company. We did fertilization, we did grass cutting, we did lawn aeration. Like we built it into, a multi six-figure business with, I think, 300 homes that we took care of. And when I saw us do that together, that's what made me start the basket business. And then I was at a crossroads in my corporate job because I traveled every single week. Every single week, I was on a plane and I was going someplace in Canada. And in order for me to get promoted to the next level, I needed to move to a different city. And I really didn't want to move. We had a good life. My husband had a good job at the time. And I remember really thinking about what is it that I'm going to do? Because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I told myself this story that I needed to have more experience in entrepreneurship to become an entrepreneur, which is kind of crazy. Like, just become an entrepreneur and you'll get the experience. And so one day, a colleague of mine said, "Why don't you just open a TELUS dealership? I mean, you run the corporate stores across Canada. If anybody knows how to make a dealership successful, you do." So I went home and I told my husband that he had said this to me, and he's like, "That's a great idea. Let's do it." And I sat on it for probably a good 30 days. And then my husband said, "So what's going on with that dealership idea?" And that night I took action and I reached out and I asked somebody about it. And I found out that the location that I wanted to open, which was just around the corner from where I lived, the RFP for that location closed the next day. And so they said, "And we're so sorry. You should have reached out to us sooner." And I went, "No, no, 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 no. I've worked for this company for 9 years. I'm going to call in a favor." So I called the VP and I said, "I'm interested in the RFP, but it closed. I'm interested in this, but the RFP closes tomorrow. Can I get an extension?" And they made an extension for me. And I put together the best damned business plan you've ever seen. And I got everything that I wanted out of that business plan. And that's how my real first step into business started.
That's crazy to hear. I think especially because you see people at the level they're at, currently, especially when you come across them if you haven't been following them for a long time. And so to hear that oh, it was, all after a pair of jeans,
Mhm,
and that it really started from, being creative and doing something small, but
mhm.
taking action, I think is the biggest takeaway that I get from that is
Yeah.
just that you have an idea and you do something with it, not just sit on it. So I
I
think that's
also
huge.
I also had an experience in life because of my Crohn's disease where I was very, very, very sick. And I was hemorrhaging from my bowel, and I ended up in ICU for a week being transfused multiple times because I had lost so much blood. And I was this little kid, and my mom was at work, and the doctor's office called her at work and said she needs to go to the city to the hospital. We can send her by ambulance, or you can take her. And so my mom didn't want me to be scared in the ambulance and to have to go by myself, so she said she would take me. And when she went to her boss, he said, "You've got problems, and so do I, and I need you here." And he would not let her leave work until 5 o'clock that day. And my mom was a single parent at the time. The scariest thing in her life was, having somebody take me away from her. So losing her job was just not on the table. Like, it couldn't happen because she could potentially lose her child. And so when she got home that afternoon, like just after 5 o'clock, and her and my aunt drove me to the hospital, and I was hospitalized for weeks because of what had happened, I learned a real defining, like a moment, a real lesson from that, because I knew in that moment that no one else would ever tell me what I could or couldn't do in my career the way that this man had done that to my mom. The guilt my mom felt, how upset she was, it really taught me that I needed to be strong and independent, and I needed to be financial free so that I was in the driver's seat of making the decisions that I wanted to make in my life.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For you personally, besides that moment, um, what ways do you believe that you've grown the most in your entrepreneurial journey as a person?
I think the ways that I've grown the most is probably self-confidence and belief in myself. I think when you start, you don't know what you don't know. And so you're nervous and you're afraid because you might make mistakes. And, I'm a numbers person, but Allie, I'm a numbers person because I almost bankrupted my business within 90 days and I had to figure cash flow out. And so I, I think that what I've learned is that I can figure shit out and I can generate income and I can do it from a place of knowing that I can do it. And so I'm not afraid like I might have been at the beginning. I have a lot of belief in what I'm capable of. And I think that's probably where the most growth comes from. But that growth comes from um, making mistakes and falling down and having to get up and figure it out. When I started this first business, I mean, the first business that I opened, it wasn't an online business. It was a bricks and mortar business. Like, it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to open that business. And 90 days later, I get a bill for inventory that I have on the shelves, and I owe $100,000. I don't have $100,000 to pay that bill. So I laid awake at night thinking, what the heck am I going to do? How am I going to tell my husband that within 90 days of opening this store, I have run out of money? And so I had to pick up the phone and I had to eat some humble pie and I had to ask colleagues that I used to work with, what do I do? And I learned all about terms and I learned all about how much time you have to pay stuff off before your credit is impacted. And I learned that once a year, you can send inventory back without paying a restocking fee. So I packed up every single thing that I had in my store and I sent it back. And I got a credit for the $100,000 that I owed. And I was able to save myself that time. But if I wasn't brave enough to pick up the phone and ask somebody when I felt like I was going to throw up because I thought that I had just crippled my business, I never would have learned that. And so I think it's all of those experiences, right? When you look at me today, you're looking at somebody who's been a full time entrepreneur, full time self employed for almost 20 years. That's 2 decades. I made a ton of mistakes in those 2 decades that have created the entrepreneur that I am today. And so for people who are listening, don't beat yourself up when you make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Learn from the mistakes. Don't make the mistakes a second time. But making the mistakes is how you grow as a person.
What do you do for your source of inspiration when you feel overwhelmed or things are not going like you thought that they would go?
There's a couple of things that I do. So when I feel overwhelmed and things aren't going the way that I thought they would go, I try to diagnose why. Like I try to step back and really think about, okay, what's really going on here? I'm also a really big believer in focusing on gratitude, focusing on what is going well, what do I have? Because sometimes the story you're telling yourself about things are not going well is a bigger story than the truth. Um, and then I invest in myself. So I'm always going to events. I'm surrounding myself with like-minded people. I'm building a network of, professionals that I can reach out to. A client of mine texted me something today and I immediately sent her 3 different people's LinkedIn profiles. And I was like, okay, here's some resources that you could use. So if I'm in one of those spots, I can pick up the phone and I can call somebody that will help me. But most of the time, it's just me, uh, sitting down and really kind of looking at what it really is. The problem that most people have is they don't spend enough time thinking about their business because they're too busy doing. And so I recommend when you're feeling overwhelmed that you sit back with a pen and a piece of paper and you just ask yourself some questions. Put your phone away, ask yourself some questions, and just journal about what you could do to change the situation that you're in. And you'll be amazed at what you come up with.
Okay, and I have one final question for you. What advice would you give to your younger self about your entrepreneurial journey? What do you wish someone had told you?
Start sooner. That's what I wish someone had told me, because when I was, I don't know, 30-ish, TELUS acquired ClearNet and I had stock options and I made a bit of money. It was like a couple $100,000 at the time. And I wish that I had been brave enough then to quit my job and start a business. I think that I just held this belief that I needed one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. Even opening the dealership was a mistake. I opened the dealership. I mean, it's not a mistake in the sense that it's great. It's part of my backstory and it's my retail experience. And I can say I've owned a bricks and mortar business and I know all about that. So when I'm coaching and guiding people, I can. But the real business that I wanted is the one I have today. But the story I told myself is that before people would ever hire me to advise them on business, I needed to own a real business. And a real business to me was a brick and mortar business. And that I needed to do that in order to be credible enough to do this other thing. And I didn't really need to take that step. I could have just did the thing that I wanted to do. And so the advice that I would give myself is start sooner.
Love it. Love it.
Awesome. Great
Yeah.
questions, Allie. You make me think. You make me
Good.
think
That was my
hard. It's
goal.
great. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I love that you framed, some of these questions for young entrepreneurs, but I think there's a whole other market of not young entrepreneurs that will benefit from them too. Because I think the fear that we feel around starting is the same, whether we're young or whether we're older. I think sometimes it's worse when you're older because you've been doing the thing that you've been doing for so long that you've got more stories and more rationalization for why you shouldn't do it. It's more scary to step up and do it. Whereas when you're young, especially if you can still live at home with your parents, you can kind of walk the tightrope and you've got a net that you can fall in. So I think your questions are great for any entrepreneur at any stage. So well
Awesome.
done, my dear. Well done. All right. Well, thank you for listening to this special episode of She Talks Business. And if you'd like to be the person who picks my brain on one of these shows, send me a message and let me know. And if you're listening and you haven't left us a review yet, like I'm looking on my podcast app, and the last review that I have on the podcast app looks to me like it was from a year ago. And I'm thinking, man, I've published so many shows. And May 17th, 2023 is the last Apple podcast review. So If you're listening and learning from these, I need you to write a review. That's it. That's all. Thanks for listening.